And the biggest legislative agenda item probably for the next 4 years is going to be extending out these tax cuts and adding whatever else, into the mix, what there might be, whether it's eliminating taxes on tips or eliminating taxes on Social Security income.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by economics reporter Zach Halashak. Zach, we've gotten some inflation numbers, the last of the Biden administration as we head into the Trump administration. Yep. What do they have to say?
Well, not great news. Inflation actually ticked up 0.2 percentage point to 2.9%, which marks 3 months now in a row of rising inflation, which is obviously the exact opposite trend that the Fed and that President-elect Trump wants to see coming into office. Now, investors are expecting there to be fewer rate cuts, just because Fed's going to have to keep interest rates higher for longer in order to drive down demand and drive down inflation. So now it looks like a lot of people don't even think the first cut's going to come until September, and some don't even think there's going to be another rate cut in 2025. Obviously, that tees up an interesting situation with Trump, because he's had some acrimony with the Federal Reserve in the past and trying to impose his authority over it. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that interplay plays out in the coming months.
So some key members of Trump's incoming economic team have already been testifying on Capitol Hill. Their confirmation hearings have been going on. What have been some of the key takeaways from that?
Yeah, so Scott Bessent testified today on Capitol Hill before the Senate Finance Committee. And the big part of this hearing,
He's the nominee for
Secretary
for
Treasury Secretary, yeah. So he would be replacing Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. And it wasn't really an acrimonious hearing like you might see in some other ones. No Yellen. But it was pretty well behaved. But basically, I would say the biggest chunk of what was discussed was the TCJA, or the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was people call the 2017 Trump tax cuts.
Right.
And the biggest legislative agenda item probably for the next 4 years is going to be extending out these tax cuts and adding whatever else into the mix, what there might be, whether it's eliminating taxes on tips or eliminating taxes on Social Security income. So yeah, I think a lot of the questions kind of centered around how he views the package, and then there's a lot of grandstanding from different members kind of using their time in the spotlight to either trash the TCJA, the tax cuts, or to expound on them and talk about how good it's been for the economy, that sort of thing. But he also faced some other questions. He was asked about sanctions on Russia. He actually kind of surprisingly said that he thinks that Biden didn't raise sanctions more because he wanted to. It's an election year and he didn't want to hurt the energy prices. And he said he would be willing to ratchet up sanctions on Russia. So that kind of made some news. But yeah, it was overall pretty harmonious hearing. But tax was the big issue of the day.
Another issue we've heard a lot of discussion about is the child tax credit, and some Republican lawmakers in these new majorities have some pretty big plans for it.
Yeah, I mean, you have people like J.D. Vance, the vice president, incoming vice president, who's a big proponent of more family subsidies, family creation subsidies. And I actually caught up with Blake Moore, who's a congressman from Utah, and we kind of just discussed this new bill he just introduced this week that would increase the child tax credit from $2,000 all the way up to $4,200 for a child aged 0 to 5, and then for kids aged up to 17 years old, it would increase it to $3,000. So that's it's more than double of an increase for the youngest children. And he said it was very crucial because family creation is something that is important for the economy, but also he's a man of faith, and he said it's the bedrock of society as well. So yeah, I think you're going to see more and more Republicans kind of as the party moves into the more populist kind of Vance realm. You're going to see more lawmakers supporting a bigger child tax credit, and again, that'll be part of the reconciliation package, that big tax cuts package, which we were talking about, that Bessent was talking about. So it'll be interesting to see where that number falls, and just kind of see how big they make it, or if they do end up expanding it.
Right, and to see how they come up with new revenue or spending offsets if they do end up expanding.
Exactly, yeah, and that's the biggest concern with all these tax deductions and things that are proposed, is how you're going to pay for it. And you have some fiscally minded lawmakers who are, you might see take a very strong line and say we can't add to our deficit. We're in this situation where debts and deficits are spiraling out of control, and we can't just afford to do this without offsets. So where that kind of falls down the road, I think it's going to come out of negotiations with Trump and House leadership and Senate leadership.
Thank you, Zach.
Yep.
You can read Zach and the rest of our policy team's coverage at WashingtonExaminer.com.